Get almost anything you need delivered with Uber Eats. What do we mean by almost? Well, you can't get a well-groomed lawn delivered, but you can get a chicken parm delivered. A little escape? No. A delicious bowl of grapes? Yes, that. An afternoon stroll? Sorry, no. A burrito bowl? Happily, yes. A day of sunshine? No. A box of fine wines? Yes. Uber Eats can definitely get you that. Get almost anything delivered with Uber Eats. Order now. Alcohol in select markets. Product availability may vary by region. See app for details. Get almost anything delivered with Uber Eats. Order now. Toyota's all in all season with another year of Toyota Game Day giveaways. The official automotive partner of the NFL is giving fans the chance to win epic prizes like Brock Purdy's favorite Toyota Sequoia, NFL shop gear, and more. Play for free by predicting which big plays will happen during the second half of every Sunday night football game. This is going to be fun. Visit toyota.com/NFL now to learn more. Toyota, let's go places. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited. Ends on 2/8/26. Open to legal residents of the 50 United States and D.C., 18 and over. For complete details, how to enter prizes, and official rules, visit toyotasgamedaygiveaways.com.
Scott Pianowski is a fantasy analyst with Yahoo Sports who's been there since 2008. He's a Fantasy Sports Writers Association Hall of Famer, an award-winning analyst, an avid golfer with multiple hole-in-ones, and he's honestly a sports encyclopedia. These are his late-round perspectives. This episode is sponsored by DraftKings. There's no better way to get closer to the action with DraftKings Daily Fantasy, the ultimate destination for football fans. New customers can play free for their share of millions in prizes with their first deposit of $5 or more. Download the DraftKings Daily Fantasy app and enter promo code LATEROUND to play free for your share of millions. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 8778-HOPE-NY. In Connecticut, call 888-789-7777. 18 plus in most states. Eligibility restrictions apply. Ends December 31st. See terms at DraftKings.com/promotions. Now back to the show. You're like one of the people that are just an encyclopedia of sports knowledge. I remember, growing up and stuff, like, whether it be in like middle school, high school or whatever, like I was always the person that people would talk to about sports because I, at least in my era and in my time frame, like I knew what was going on across sports. And then you go out in the real world and you see people from not just your little bubble and you're like, oh, these people really know a lot about what's going on. And I feel like you're one of those people. You just have a very wide breadth of knowledge across many, many sports. So it's always a pleasure to talk some ball with you.
That's a really nice compliment. I appreciate that. It's just, I always say when people say something to me like that, and sometimes they say it, with a little bit of amazement, I just point out that whatever you're naturally interested in, you're going to throw yourself into. That could be cooking, that could be gardening, that could be coaching youth league basketball, whatever it is. Everybody's got stuff. I'm a big dog person. There's always been a dog in my life for like the last 25 or 30 years, although I can't say I know a lot about that. I just, try to be the best dog father I can. But
of course,
so whatever it is that you're naturally interested in. And JJ, when I was growing up, if you were to look at my house or in my library, or, I had all these reference books, right? I had the baseball encyclopedia and I had all these annual,
not shocking.
All these annual magazines I didn't want to throw out because I wanted to, and now the internet comes along. And the internet is one gigantic reference tool. And look at just the unbelievable stuff we have. Pro Football Reference is amazing. And the Fantasy Points data suite is fantastic. And there's just so much good. And obviously the work that you do is always data driven, and we could not do our jobs without the internet. Yeah. So I just feel so lucky to be in this time period where all the stuff that I used to get at the library or on microfilm, or I'd buy old Sports Illustrateds at a garage sale or something like that. Yeah. And then, man, it's sad to see Sports Illustrated kind of die off because that was part of my childhood, but it's all on the internet now. Yeah. And so if you want to, I love going back at old NFL drafts. I did a piece this week about Jonathan Taylor, about how he stacked up historically in the first 8 games of a season. And I can just go on to Football Reference and about 30 seconds, I had a list that I needed, So I just love that we're in the era that if you love sports, if you love history, if you love stats, data, we can watch any highlight. A guy makes a great play. It's on social media in 30 seconds. So what a time to be alive.
Yeah, there's a lot of nostalgia because I was probably at I'm like the last part of, because I'm like right in the smack dab middle millennial, right? And so I'm like right in the last area of when I was born, of growing up without really the internet and stuff, like as a child, like not having all of that at my disposal and stuff, like to the point where when I was playing NHL 94 or something on Sega, I was going to the newspaper to see what rosters looked like so that I could update rosters and trade players and stuff like that based on what the newspaper was saying. Or I collected baseball cards and hockey cards and football cards, and you'd have to get the Beckett, right, and like go through that to see what the card is worth. And so like I feel in one way, I feel really lucky that I was, born when I was, to be able to have experienced that. But then, and then you get that nostalgia, right, of just like thinking back to opening up a Sports Illustrated and getting in the mail and just getting excited about that. But then at the same time, you're like, but it's so freaking awesome that we can literally just do all of that stuff in 13 seconds, as opposed to, having to spend so much time and doing. But at the same time, I do think that there's like a little bit of that, the fact that it took as much time as it did to do certain things, with baseball cards, whatever, you just naturally learn stuff a little bit more easily through doing that, as opposed to just using, AI and stuff. I know I sound like a boomer right now, but, instead of just like looking it up so quickly and so easily, because you're just learning a little bit differently.
My fantasy football experience goes back to a time when we scored by hand. Yeah. And when the idea of having an advantage was you read the USA Today and somebody else didn't. One of my early advantages was I was online. I was on the Prodigy service before the internet really kind of popped. And I had a friend of mine, and you might know Dan Williamson, who's in the fantasy football space, and he was a Minnesota guy. And he told me the year Randy Moss was a rookie, he's like, well, they just had a practice and Randy Moss scored 7 touchdowns. You're going to want to draft him. And this was back in an era where rookie receivers, you don't want to go near those guys. See you in year 3. It's and I realized Moss was kind of a unicorn then. That all changed in 2014, of course. But my early advantages were, I read newspapers. My early advantages were I had some internet contacts when most people weren't on the internet. And now I think that news advantage, that information advantage is just about nothing now, because everything is shared. And even the weakest manager in your league can get pretty good advice if they just have their eyes open and their ears open, or they have their phone turned on part of the day. So that's gone away. It used to just be by paying attention and maybe taking a little bit of an extra step. Man, did you have an edge? Yeah. Well, I got to ask you, you're a hockey head, and I got to ask you, post 1990. So this is because I was a late 80s baby. So post 1990, give me your hockey Mount Rushmore. Give me 4. This is on the spot for the record. So I know that this is, but there's going to be a couple that are givens here, but I'm very curious who these 4 players would be. That's a great question. So I'm going to use my own rules, and I'm not sucking up to the host, but Mario Lemieux is on the Mount Rushmore, period, even if you took out the restrictions. So I know his career started in the 80s. I still think his peak offense is perhaps the best I've ever seen. So I'm going to get Lemieux in there. Connor McDavid is the best current player I've ever seen, the best stick handler I've ever seen. I got to see an Edmonton-Detroit game a couple of years ago, and regular season game, you never know what version of players will show up. And McDavid showed up. He had like 7 shots on goal. It felt like 27, and I just watched him all night. It was dazzling. So go with those 2 guys, and a lot of other people I could name, but I was just looking up Ovechkin and Crosby. Obviously, Ovechkin set the goal record. Him and Crosby came into the league at the same time. There was the lockout, the loaded time for an influx of talent. And hockey has done a lot of things. Look, Gary Bettman gets a lot of criticism. He deserves it. But the game's gotten a lot better in the last 10 or 15 years. And I think a big part of that hockey getting where it needs to go has been just the influx of talent. And, Ovechkin, the most natural goal scorer we've ever seen. I think he would have scored 100 goals if he played in the 80s. Yeah. And Crosby, with his resume, that speaks for itself. The grace, maybe the best stick handler I've ever seen. What a great passer, what great vision. So, yeah, I had to shoehorn a couple of Penguins in there. I was gonna say, I'm sorry, Bob Airy's not going to make the list. Brown's not going to make the list. Maybe I'll just say Michael, motorcycle. Michael's there for the late announcer. Mike Lang. Mike Lang, who was fantastic. But Yeah, much love to the Pittsburgh area. I mean, I was at Providence College when Send It In Jerome happened. Dave Damashek and I are longtime friends. He's obviously a Pittsburgh guy, and I just love the vibe of that city. That all the teams have the same colors, which I think is cool.
Yeah, it's cool.
The ballpark is a gem. Steeler fans I think are usually really cool people. They obviously travel really well to road games. So there's so much history in that city that I care about, even though as a Bruins fan, I always hated the Penguins. Don't get me started on Ulf Samuelsson, but I can never hate on Lemieux. He was incredible.
I mean, I know this is a football podcast. The Lemieux stuff is crazy just because he battled health related things that people, when they look at the stat sheet, and they do Google and they look, they're not going to see that, that what he did fight. But yeah, I mean, look, to be fair, you have the Patriots have dominated the Steelers over the last 2 decades. So let's at least the Patriots have their dynasty that they can fall back on.
Let me ask you this, guy. I've never asked you this before, and I know there's kind of a split with Steelers fans on Mike Tomlin. A lot of people are like, hey, we have one of the right answers at coach. That's great. And a lot of other people are like, well, what's this losing the playoffs every year? 9-8, 10-7. That's not acceptable.
Yeah.
What's your stance on Tomlin?
I've been saying this to people. Like, I've been a borderline apologist because grass is always greener with head coaches, as we know. But I do think that oddly, like, the straw for me was that Bengals game. There was no adjusting, and even the things that he says, and I know that they're just sound bites, through the media. But even the things that he talks about, like the first thing he talked about in his presser after this past game was the fact that the offense, couldn't finish drives and stuff. When, like, very clearly and obviously, and he's, saying that Terrell Austin's fine, and that it's not the, DC's fault, and, it's more on the offense. And I think anyone with 2 eyes that's watched football for any amount of time knows that the problem in Pittsburgh is the defense. And if you were to say that Pittsburgh was going to get this kind of play from Aaron Rodgers, you would probably say that they would be comfortably a top 3 to 5 team in the AFC, probably, like, entering the season. And so, I think that they're stuck in, like the 2005 to 2010 timeframe in terms of how you play on defense, what matters, what you stop and what you do offensively. And there's just not enough adjusting going on. Obviously, a player's coach, people love to play for him, and that matters to a degree. But at some point, it's just a tiring thing. I mean, they've literally been doing the same thing now for 8 years defensively. I mean, literally the whole time, but I mean, like, it's been a problem for a good, 8 years or so. And, because of that, I'm now more, I'm probably more in the middle because, I go to Facebook or something and all these Yinzers are just screaming about, firing Tomlin. And they've been doing that for the last couple of years now. I'm probably not like so far in that extreme, but I can understand that sometimes in these situations, you need to kind of move on and let that person hopefully thrive somewhere else, and then you find someone that can thrive in the environment that you're in. Right.
I mean, you think about the Patriots, there was a time when the Patriots and Tom Brady needed a divorce. There was a time when the Patriots and Belichick needed a divorce. And it's kind of been sad to see Belichick kind of devolve into the Tyson zone, where any headline that you hear about Belichick now would sound somewhat plausible, no matter how crazy it was. NFL coaches, all coaches, by the way, we were talking about hockey earlier. The shelf life of a hockey coach is incredibly short.
Oh, yeah.
But NFL coaches, generally, there are more mediocre ones than good ones. Mm-hmm. And long-term answers are extremely rare. And even with that, at some point, there comes a time where the Steelers maybe say, and I know they're so proud of their coaching legacy. They've only had a handful of them. They've had, Chuck Noll was coached for such a long time. Cowher was such a long coach and decorated coach and all that. And I wonder if people remember, why do they keep calling him Coach Cowher? Well, yeah, he actually used to coach the Steelers. It feels like 100 million years ago. But at some point you just say, I know this is a good man here, and I know this is a good organization here, but it's just time to do something else.
Yeah.
And Mike Tomlin would, he would have an announcing job if he wanted one. He would have a head coaching job at several places if he became available. But at some point, you need to move on. As a Patriots fan, man, I'm just thrilled that Tennessee, I think, wrongly did that with Mike Vrabel. I don't think maybe it was the time to move on. I realized there was a power struggle going on there. Jonathan Mayo was obviously nice guy, obviously over his head last year. I guess Kraft had promised Mayo the job, which is why they didn't hire Vrabel the earlier year. Right. But it's it's just so nice to have these press conferences where Vrabel says all the right stuff. Yeah. He's smart enough to appeal to the smart players. He's emotional enough to appeal to the emotional players. And I've always felt that Tomlin was that too, right? He's great emotional, great motivator. And he's obviously dealt with some mercurial talents, shall we say, during his Pittsburgh time, but he's smart enough to appeal to you intellectually as well. There's not that many, usually coaches do one or the other. Either they're the egghead, or they're going to get you to run through a wall, but somebody else is doing the X's and O's. If you have somebody who can do both of those things, you've really got it knocked. But I think we probably line up on Tomlin. I've always been the apologist or on his side, but at some point things just you're not meant to be a head coach for 30 years, on one team. Eventually you have to go do something else. And I wonder if they're getting to that point.
Yeah, I also think today's NFL is going to be driven by smart play callers and good, offensive schemers. And Tomlin's Steelers were best when they had good offensive coordinators and good, the ability to do things that were different offensively, while, the NFL couldn't necessarily adapt to what he was doing defensively where they have now. And, I also think that the way they've built the team, they went through years. Kevin Colbert, their old, GM who was running the squad, they had horrible drafts, like over and over and over again. And they couldn't replicate what they were doing in like the late 2000, the 2005 to 2010 timeframe into the 2015s. I mean, it was just bad draft. Go look at this. Anyone listening, go look at the Steelers drafts from like 2015 to 2022. Basically when the Kenny Pickett draft happened. Horrible draft after horrible draft. And that can take, and push a team back pretty tremendously as well. So we'll see, man.
It's great that you point that out, because I think I probably overlooked that sometimes, because they've hit so many times on receivers outside the first round.
Yeah.
And for fantasy, obviously, we're always going to be focused on the skill position players, even though everybody is important to the shape of our roster. And maybe that it just obscures it, so many misses they've had at other positions. So I'm going to have some fun. We talked about, the internet and, getting lost in football reference. I think after we finish this call, I'm going to go do some post facto drafting. And man, as a Patriots fan, N'Keal Harry is like a trigger for me. That year they had all these right answers at wide receiver. There's like 7 or 8 guys who were screaming values, and they took N'Keal Harry, who basically couldn't play in the NFL.
Yeah. I mean, look, if you're looking at the Steelers drafts, you're going to be prepared to just your jaw will drop with some of these selections. Let's talk a little fantasy football here. When we look back on this fantasy season, what narrative or narratives do you think that we're going to walk away with? Like, do you think that given the way that tight ends have performed, we're going to see that position a certain way, maybe late round quarterbacking? Like, what would that thing be? Maybe multiple things be when we look back at this season?
You're certainly right that tight end, this was a year that the second tier was the place to shop. And I'm curious to see how people spin that at the end of the year. And I'll do a series where I go over every position at Yahoo at the end of the season and do kind of, I call it an exit interview. That's certainly one of the themes. Last year, other than McCaffrey, the running back position generally just so low with the injury rate. Yeah. And a lot of the older running backs had really great seasons. A lot of running backs escaped bad teams, went to good teams, and they smashed. Yep. And then this year, it's been a reality bites kind of season for Derrick Henry, although he's been okay, but he hasn't been quite what we expected. Obviously, Jackson's injury has been tied to that. Alvin Kamara looks like there's maybe nothing left with him. I know Barkley's had a disappointing season, although that's tied to a lot of different things. And this year, you look at before the season, people are like, who do I stack? Where are my stacks? How am I going to win this big contest? And I'm talking to people before the season, trying to locate the right ones. And man, you look at the top 3 or 4 rounds, and almost every major receiver quarterback stack you could have come up with has failed for different reasons. A large part of that is the injuries at the quarterback position. Obviously, once Joe Burrow gets hurt, the Burrow Chase stack is dead on the vine. It's been nice to see Joe Flacco at least make that offense somewhat competent the last few weeks, although we have to be realistic with Flacco expectations. But I think this is a year where stacks have fallen short, and I have to try to figure out what that means. And really simple trade-off. Last year, talk about Burrow, right? Cincinnati, perfect fantasy setup. Move the ball, concentrated target tree, usage tree, can't stop anybody, weekly 40 to 39 football. They played the Ravens twice, I think, and they're still scoring points. Yeah. This year, Dallas has become that team. Maybe not quite as explosive as that Carnival was in Cincinnati last year, but defense stinks. Dak has largely been very good. I realize he didn't play great against Denver, and they pulled him early because the game was out of hand. But he's had a really nice season. Pickens has ascended. They have Lamb back now. Ferguson, because that concentration is so tight, he's kind of the third amigo. And Javonte Williams, man, there's something I didn't see coming.
Yeah, Sam.
I thought I have him. One of the Expo teams I drafted him was just one of those.
Exactly the same thing that happened to me too. Yeah,
it was not a target. I can claim no credit for this, JJ. It was like, I got to pick somebody. Javonte Williams is still a football player. Maybe I thought he might just be like, okay, I might have to play him if injuries hit.
Right.
You always say at running back. I always say, can I get 10 touches projectable here? Can I get 12 touches projectable? Now that there's so many platoons around the league, that makes somebody playable. So I thought maybe Williams had the slightest amount of value. I saw no upside. If somebody said to me, what's the upside Javonte Williams? I would have said 0.
Right. Floor play, not a ceiling play.
Boring floor play, depth play, and somebody I'll cut in week 5. That's what I thought was coming. And instead, he's turned into like one of the 5 or 6 most important guys to land on.
Yeah, same exact thing happened to me. I do think that there is like people always ask like, oh, do you dominate, home leagues and versus analyst leagues and stuff like that? I'd say like generally speaking, I'm probably a little bit better in like home leagues and more casual leagues, especially. But there's a thing with like, you're mentioning the Expo drafts and, the Kings Classic drafts and stuff. And there's definitely a sense of, this isn't to like trash any of the analysts that we play with because we're guilty of it too. There's a sense, there's ego to this, right? Where like we feel like we know what's going to happen to a degree. Like we want to stake our claim on certain players. And when you realize that when you're drafting amongst other players or other managers who are thinking the exact same way, you end up finding really great values. Like I tell this story all the time on the show, but like when I drafted Javonte Williams in the snake draft, I literally, right before I picked him, I said, I'm about to vomit. I'm going to take Javonte Williams. And I literally got booed by the people who were in there. Like it was just, it's a fun atmosphere. We were all just joking around and stuff, but like nobody wanted him. And a lot of that though is definitely, we're all guilty of piling on and having, similar takes based on, just, it's not groupthink per se, but it's this idea that like we respect one another. And if one person is seeing something in someone, we then go look into that thing and we're like, oh yeah, I kind of see that too. But a lot of times in those leagues, you can go against the grain just a little bit and, get Javonte Williams and he's a sliding value. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I ended up having a really good team. And that team that I drafted 7-1 right now largely because of Javonte Williams. So it's just an interesting dynamic.
For sure. And it's hard. I mean, if I have a stance on something, if I'm not dug in on something and I see you feel a certain way and Rich Rebar agrees with you and Pat Fitzmaurice agrees with you and Ian Hartitz agrees with you, Evan Silva agrees with you, it's hard to think, okay, well, these are all smart guys I like and respect. Right, sure. I mean, it's hard not to line up sometimes, but it's funny. My friend Mike Selfing, a lot of times talks about he's trying. I think he goes too far with this, of course, but he's always trying to avoid the hipster picks. He's trying to not make the picks that are going to win the favor of the room, and he's trying sometimes to go with the ugly picks. And again, Williams comes under that heading. The thing about Williams is that I thought maybe if he was going to have that spike year after the injury, I thought it was going to happen last year. He did so little last year.
Right.
And also we talked about JJ feels this way. Ian feels this way. Pat feels this way. Drew Davenport feels this way, right? We feel good about that. Mm-hmm. The converse to that is I've seen Dallas do so many dumb things over the years that when they added Javonte Williams, it almost made me like him even less. I'm like, of course Dallas is adding Javonte Williams. What, they couldn't get Zeke Elliott on the phone? What's going on here? And, the first week he had the touchdowns against Philly. I'm like, that's a fluke. Those are going to be touchdown passes eventually. Somebody eventually is going to emerge and push him out of the way. And it's just a great reminder that nobody knows anything. I mean, we have guesses. We have all we can do. And this as well as anybody. You put the work in, you watch the games, you run all sorts of data, and you have you have an intelligent, smart reason for what you project, but it's still a projection. It's still a guess. It's an intelligent guess. It's a reasonable guess. It's the way to play, but there's still such wide error bars in everything that we put out.
100%. I mean, look, this is a peer-to-peer game, right? We're playing other people who also are going to have those very wide range of, and they're going to have errors as well. And I think that's part of the problem with the way that people consume fantasy content, if I'm being honest, is that, and I try to be so honest about what I'm saying about players. Like, this could go this way, but this is the median outcome. Let's think in terms of range of outcomes. And I think that like what we do need to realize though is that it's a game of probability, and in that game of probability, you're playing amongst other managers who are also playing a game of probability. Mm-hmm. And so if you can just increase that probability, you don't have to be perfect. You're never going to be like, I look back at drafts where I diversify or I make certain choices that I'm like, why did I, and I see people in my Discord all the time where they're like, why did I draft this guy over this guy? You can play that game all day long, all the time. As long as in the moment when you're making that decision, you are logical with what you are doing, you can't hurt yourself and be mad at yourself over that decision that you made. That's my stance, at least, right?
Yeah.
What pisses me off? Yeah. What angers me more is when, like, I think my process with Javonte in hindsight wasn't as strong as it should have been. If we're just going to use Javonte as the example, I was like 4 or 5 running back spots even below the market with Javonte. It was one of my biggest like errors in my rankings this year. Obviously there's good stuff, there's bad stuff, there's just the way that it goes. But one of the errors that I made is that part of my process is to not overstate running back metrics in general, because we know they're so dependent upon what's going on around them, et cetera, et cetera. And then you add on, like you said, there was the injury with Javonte. We did expect more last year. Totally agree with you there. But then you look at like, okay, we know that Miles Sanders is almost definitely dust, right? And then you look at Jaden Blue, and I like Jaden Blue as a prospect because I thought he was very electric and he had an interesting ceiling. Like maybe they could use him in like a Tony Pollard rookie year, early career Tony Pollard type of way, or even like a Jahmyr Gibbs, but not as much, and he's not nearly as electric. But at the same time, doing all the prospecting work with Jaden Blue, I knew he wasn't a bell cow back. Mm-hmm. Like I knew that the whole time, like even the offseason, go read any of the blurbs or anything that I wrote and talked about with Jaden Blue. Never did I say he would be a bell cow back. So why didn't I just merge all that together and say, no, Javonte is actually a decent pick? And there's one other player that I did this with from a process perspective that I look back, and I'd love to hear if you have any of these too, but like Calvin Ridley. Okay. I decided in like early-ish August that I was going to buy into Calvin Ridley at ADP. And I am very upset about it because I've done so much research in my history on wide receivers with rookie quarterbacks very rarely beating expectation. And I decided to buy into this player who was decent last year, but not necessarily elite. Like there wasn't this like obvious and massive elite trait to Calvin Ridley that I absolutely needed to buy into. And so those are the two players when I look back on the season. I miss stuff like Travion Henderson and all that. I get all that. And like I have regrets for some of that stuff. But the process in which I went about like getting to those players wasn't as frustrating as it was specifically for Calvin Ridley and Javonte Williams.
Yeah, I got Ridley wrong too. I thought, well, if he could succeed in that offense last year, if Cam Ward can be even half a step better than the bad quarterbacks they had, then how can Calvin Ridley not be successful? Right. There's just not that much behind him on the depth chart. And well, Ward played a little bit worse than I thought for the first month, and the coaching staff was over its head. Yep. I also wonder why I wasn't picking and or betting against Brian Callahan for his entire career, because he basically never covered, and now that's gone. We'll never get that back again. That's just wasted opportunity. And this stuff all makes sense in hindsight, but you have to live life forward. Life only makes sense looking backwards, but you have to live it moving forward. So Ridley was one I got wrong. And I also thought, much in the same vein, I thought, well, Brian Thomas was so great last year, and look, a lot of it was with Mac Jones, who I probably wasn't giving Mac Jones enough credit for that. Right. I just thought Mac Jones was just another kind of guy, kind of a goofball, as my colleague Matt Harmon might say. Yeah. And I'm like, well, I know Hunter's good, but he's going to play defense some, and I like Liam Cohen, and I didn't want to give up on what the ceiling might be for Trevor Lawrence, which I've clung to that way too long, and I'm wondering if maybe I shouldn't cling to that anymore. I just thought Brian Thomas was too good to fail, and I'm seeing through two months of the NFL season that that's actually not true. And I feel extremely lucky because a player like Thomas, you're going to have very specific draft slots to take him. Right. And I didn't have those slots. I would have been overweight on Thomas if I had a reasonable, maybe just an average distribution of draft positions. I would have had more Thomas stake. I just didn't have the positions that made sense for him to be taken by me. And so I avoided that, but that was just happenstance. And, if you followed my advice on Brian Thomas, I've led you into a ditch.
Yeah, what's interesting is that I don't remember there being a season where it was so obvious which draft spots and slots you would ideally want to be in. I mean, if you were in the front half of the draft, from a snake draft standpoint, you're probably crushing right now. There's at least a good chance that you're having a good fantasy season. Whereas the back half, you could have taken multiple wide receivers that we all thought were in a really good spot and they failed. And then there was that wall that you would hit in the third round where you start to get question marks and you're like reaching for running backs and stuff like that. Hopefully you fell into James Cook, in that 3-4 area. But if you're in the front half, you get a CMC type, you get a, Bijan or a Jahmyr Gibbs. Second round, you could have gotten Josh Jacobs or Jonathan Taylor potentially. Third round, you get JSN. There's there were so many more and better outs in that front half that, it's wild because it just goes to show that, don't be so overconfident in your ability to project that kind of stuff, because over the summer, everyone was talking about how this was the deepest first round and the best, first round and a half that we've seen in fantasy football in some time. And looking back, it's the front half of the first round and then the back half of the second round. So it was those spots that were like in the 1 to 6, 1 to 7 range.
Yeah. Let me tell you a quick story about Jonathan Taylor, who's on one of my Expo teams that also has Javonte Williams. That team, I think, is 7-1.
Okay.
And I got to call that team an accident because I draft Taylor in the second round. That was the snake draft team. We do a draft and an auction during that weekend. What a fun time it is. Try to get down there, by the way. If you haven't gotten to the expo, it's a great chance to just hang out with people in the industry and talk and share ideas. And then we played golf this past year. It was a blast. So I draft Taylor. If Taylor and Jacobs were on the board, thought about it, took Taylor. They have me on fantasy radio, Sirius radio after. And I'm kicking myself. I'm really beating myself up for not taking Jacobs. Like, well, you get a bet on the safer infrastructure, and at that point, we don't know who the Colts quarterback is. Right.
You could argue it was leaning Anthony Richardson at that time.
It did feel that way. We drafted in early August. I felt like it leaned Richardson, and I want to be. I know you're extremely transparent. One of your strengths as a analyst, I think, is your process is so transparent, and you explain what you're doing. You own your wins and losses and all that, and it's why you're such a great follow in this space. So transparently, I want to say that I thought Jones was the quote unquote right pick. I never in a million years saw this range of outcomes that he would have the season that he's having. This renaissance. And the Colts would be, when I rewatch the games every Monday, JJ, I can't wait to put the Colts tape in. I don't want to watch the Browns. I don't want to watch the Saints. I want to see what the Colts are doing because they're so much fun. And the receiver room complements each other so well. And Jones is playing at such a high level. And Steichen is reminding us why we fell in love with him like 4 or 5 years ago. But at the time, I took Taylor because I've always loved Taylor. And then I thought, Jacobs was the right pick. He's just got such a safer backdrop. And Jacobs has been a perfectly fine player. Yeah, he's been great. But Taylor is smashing. Taylor is just having a season where if the person who has Taylor in your league is almost guaranteed a great team. And in many leagues, it's the first place team. And it's just so funny how after I made that pick, I'm kicking myself. I'm like, I should have taken the safer pick. I should have taken Jacobs. And it turns out that I fell into Taylor, loving the player, not trusting the infrastructure. And it turns out that was the right answer.
Yeah. That's usually the right answer. Usually we overstate our ability to, and I've tried really hard to lean into that more from a process standpoint, over the last handful of years is target talent, make sure that you're focused on that first and foremost. And the rest will hopefully fall in place. And sometimes it doesn't. And, sometimes you get situations like I've been really upset. Look, the Travion Henderson stuff, I definitely think that he's had his own issues and I think he's in his own head. Fortunately, we finally saw a little bit more from him this past week before that fumble. But the Travion Henderson stuff just drives me nuts because I think it's a combination of the two things. I think that New England's not using him properly. And I also think that he has not lived up to the prospect that I and others thought that he was, right? And so it's just this combination of just, honestly, fantasy football hell, where you finally see them last week, get him on the outside more, tons of toss plays, a lot more, because that's where he can shine. Like, that's why anyone thought, like, from a pass catching standpoint, we all just generally were like, yeah, like he can do a lot through the air. And maybe this is their new, like, James White type toy that they can just get on the outside and just throw him some dump offs and he can like let him do his thing because he's got so much burst and ability after the catch. And we just haven't seen that much. And so I do think that the talent evaluation for Travion so far has been an L, but also you need that infrastructure still, that still needs to be there because sometimes you're going to get mediocre talent evaluation, mediocre talents, I should say, in really, really great environments. And that still can work out and pan out for those players too.
Yeah, I find myself every week in one way or another saying bet on talent, on talent, trade advice or a start say question or something like that. And also, just one point I meant to make about Javonte Williams when we were talking about him. how running back is different than the other positions, because whoever has the baton, whoever has the usage, that's the one position where ordinary talent, great usage, you're fine with it. Where the other positions, I think, are so much more talent driven. Again, Salfino has talked about comparing this to closers in fantasy baseball, where you're not necessarily in the weeds about what their stats are. If somebody is in the ninth inning and is competent, they don't have to be that great. They're getting saves. You need saves in fantasy baseball, and you roll with that. So a lot of times, just who's got the touches, who's got the baton, who's got the high value touches, who's getting the catches, who's in third down. Hurry up. Obviously, the goal line is always going to be important. And because I think it's kind of liberating to just throw out there just the stuff you got wrong. I wasn't just in on Henderson like a lot of people were, but I was pounding the table and saying, I remember when the Patriots took the wrong Georgia running back. I remember when they took Sony Michel. And then Nick Chubb went after that. And obviously Belichick had his ear with the Georgia coaches. I'm sure they probably leaned him towards Michel, but whatever. Sony Michel was an okay player. Nick Chubb was a great player before the injuries hit. And then this year we saw it with Ohio State. My take was Cleveland took the wrong guy, Judkins. Henderson is really who you wanted. The Patriots are going to get it right this time. They went second. The other team picked wrong. Not that I thought Judkins was bad, but he obviously had the suspension clouding over his first season, and then he hadn't even signed yet. And they had other guys in the backfield who aren't that bad. Sampson had a pretty good college career as well. Ford's, a player of some talent. So I'm like, yeah, man, this year, the two running backs, same team, Cleveland and New England. This time, New England's going to win that one. Now, of course, Henderson's story, the future is unwritten.
Sure. It
was nice to see him pop in week 8. And I love that you mentioned the toss play. I can see it in the back of my mind where they do that misdirection left, toss to the right.
Yes.
And Henderson makes a chunk run, but most of the first part of that run was like open space.
Yeah.
And so that's a play design win for Josh McDaniels, a play design win for the Patriots. And there's no reason why Henderson has been a disappointment. He's been a miss. He's been whatever you want to call him. You can call him a bust if you want. For a long time, people just couldn't play him. You couldn't really cut him. Nobody wants to trade for him. I get all that. But the future is unwritten. There's no reason why Travion Henderson, a week from now, 2 weeks from now, might be an automatic starter. He's just one game away from popping, because I just don't think Stevenson is ever going to be a ceiling player. And I still Henderson, younger, fresher legs, obviously the profile we liked at Ohio State. I still think there's a ceiling to be excited about. And it may just be him gaining some confidence and maybe the coaching staff being a little bit more proactive with him.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And right now, at the time of this recording, Stevenson has that toe injury that we don't know that much about. There's rumors right now they're going to trade for a running back, and that they're, and look, I think that people hearing that, they're like, oh, they hate Travion Henderson. I mean, that's part of it is that like Henderson was never like the early down bruiser type. Like that's not what he projected to be. And in fantasy, we care more about the receiving types. We care about those guys that can make those big plays and those splash plays in today's game. Like that's the Jahmyr Gibbs way, if you will. Right. And, obviously Gibbs can do a lot more. But with the rumors and stuff, I see it more as let's see what's going on with Ramondre Stevenson. And they don't have someone they can rely on comfortably at this point, because Travion Henderson's not that between the tackles guy. He's proven that he's not that guy yet right now. I don't know if he ever will be. And so they're looking at this like, hey, we have a shot this year. Like our team is actually playing really well, and Drake May is arguably the MVP. We got to get a player here that can handle that workload between the tackles. And that's, to me, where these rumors are stemming from. And maybe by the time you hear this podcast, they traded for Tony Pollard or something, right? But I do think that, like, you're right. Like I've not been, early on in his career, I was okay with Ramondre because I generally, from a prospecting standpoint, will lean into players to bigger bodied players and running backs who can catch passes. That's always just like, if you want a shorthand for a way to spot a decent running back prospect from day 3, there it is, pass catchers who are big. And so Stevenson was attractive from that standpoint. But yeah, I mean, like, I don't think that he's got, the only 2 games where he really popped were against Miami and Tennessee this year, where, of course, most running backs are popping against them.
Although oddly, Bijan Robinson didn't happen last week.
Yeah, let's forget about that.
It may have been a Kirk Cousins problem. You had a nice career, Kirk Cousins. If you just walked off into the sunset and roamed the earth like Jules Winfield in Pulp Fiction, I think we'd all be fine with that. Carry a briefcase around if you need to. But man, that was frustrating. But Stevenson somehow lived through fumbling too, which a lot of coaches, Belichick would have sent him to Siberia. I give Vrabel credit, or the coaching staff. Again, Vrabel gets credit for everything. He's the top of the food chain, but a lot of decisions are made by his coaching staff, of course, too. At least they didn't mothball him. And I love that tip about the bigger receivers who can catch the ball. That's such a great shorthand for we've seen now in the NFL, it's not unusual for second day, third day running backs to be fantasy viable and pretty quickly. So that's a excellent thing to look for when we're trying to figure out some of these guys when the combine hits and when the draft hits next spring. It's certainly something I'll have in the back of my mind.
Yeah. Yeah, pass catching in general, man. It's always something that even like Woody Marks. I didn't think Woody Marks was going to be that big of a early down player in the NFL, but he had such a good receiving profile. And I'm like, sure, if you have that, that's so important to fantasy football. So we'll lean into that a little bit.
This message is brought to you by Apple Card. Does this sound familiar? You're in line at checkout, cart full of items. Your toddler is screaming for a treat, and you left your wallet in the car. Or was it at home? No need to panic. With your iPhone in hand, you can tap to pay using Apple Card with Apple Pay, and you'll earn unlimited daily cash back when you do. So if your credit card is an Apple Card, maybe it should be. Subject to credit approval, Apple Card issued by Goldman Sachs Bank USA, Salt Lake City branch. Terms and more at applecard.com.
Get almost anything you need delivered with Uber Eats. What do we mean by almost? Well, you can't get a well-groomed lawn delivered, but you can get chicken parmesan delivered. A day at the lake? That's a no. A Philly cheesesteak? That's a yes. An afternoon stroll? Sorry, no. A burrito bowl? Happily, yes. What about a day of sunshine? Not happening. A box of fine wines? Yes, that's happening. Delivery on its way. Okay, how about some clear skies? Nope. Well, then how about some French fries? Yep. A little escape? No. A delicious bowl of grapes? Yes. Yes, that. How about a freshly cut lawn? Can't help you there, but barbecued prawns? Order it and it's on its way. Get almost anything delivered with Uber Eats. Order now. Alcohol in select markets. Product availability may vary by region. See app for details.
Speaking about the talent, I think that there's a chance too that we see more Bashal Tutin. Like I think that we could see more of that starting to happen. And look at the trajectory. I'm not saying that he's playing as well as Bucky Irving did last year. He's not. And they're not the same kind of running back at all. But it is nice to know that you had an offensive coordinator in Liam Cohen last year lean on the talent profile and say, I have Rachaad White. He's an okay player. He's a great pass catcher, but he's not that great, on the ground and not as reliable on the ground. I'm going to start using Bucky Irving more down the stretch. Again, I'm not making the comp that Bucky Irving is Bashal Tutin, but what I am saying is that Travis Etienne really lived off of some big plays early on in the season. And if you look at his metrics right now, it's not like he's been an unbelievably amazing back. And you look at how he's performed over the last X number of weeks, especially outside of garbage time. Like it's not been butterflies and rainbows for ETN. And you got to wonder, there was that shoulder injury for Tutin that he kind of dealt with week in and week out, where he's on the injury report and then he would just play. Maybe he healed up during the bye. Maybe they want to use him a little bit more. I still think Tutin's a really good stash in fantasy leagues.
I love it too. And remember, they drafted Tutin. They drafted Hunter for that matter. They inherited the other guys. I mean,
right.
Everybody would love to inherit Brian Thomas Jr., but
right.
Travis Etienne has kind of proven to be maybe a jag on the Jags the last few seasons. And Tutin also got the benefit of Bigsby being traded. So
yeah.
at least the backfield is a little bit cleaner, right? We can get down to two backs of note.
And I love what you said. Guys, you don't have to agree with me. Just, at least you can walk away and say, okay, that was rational. That's fine. That's how it should be. I don't want only agreement and only, I want disagreement. Let's just have it, in a nice,
civil disagreement for sure.
Yeah, right.
A reasonable disagreement is I will not only will I always welcome it, but that's how you learn.
Yeah.
Right. That's ultimately what you should do, dear listener, is find your circle, the people you respect the most. But I used to do this with my friend Kevin Kuzo, who's a great fantasy player. I've done it with Dan Williamson, I mentioned before. Drew Davenport and I will do this sometimes. Have a summit before the season. And talk about, find like 5 or 10 things you don't agree on and try to hash it out. And then talk about the stuff you do agree on. Talk about the different offenses. And, before the season, I was talking to Kevin, like, what do you think of this new coordinator, this new coach, and hash it out with the people that you respect, and especially focus on where you don't agree, because that's where you're most likely to learn something. You're most likely to pick up something that may be useful to you, because you have to be careful. Again, it's so easy to fall into the group think, into the herd think. And a lot of times the herd is right. A lot of times there's a wisdom of crowds that applies. But I think the great learning moments sometimes are find the smartest people and where you not agree, and you can learn something from that.
Yeah, love that. Love that. Speaking of rookie wide receivers, though, with Travis Hunter, are there any other rookies that you're excited about down the stretch, whether they be obvious ones like a Tedero McMillan or a not so obvious one?
Well, I'll give you 3 names I wrote down. I believe it's Chimray DK. I've seen it pronounced a couple different ways. He's really been a nice player the last couple of weeks, and I think people forgot that, Ian Manor was getting a little bit of buzz early in the year, and he hasn't been bad by any means. And obviously that offense has been hard to trust for much of the season. But DK was drafted earlier, and because he runs the slot routes, those are easier throws. They're quicker to find. They have a higher chance of being completed. He's obviously made some splash plays on special teams, which impresses me. Also impresses Evan Silva. He loves guys who make punt return plays and stuff like that. But DK's impressed me on the tape. His stats look good. Ward started to play a little bit better. I wonder if some of his early struggles, Broncos, Rams, some of the better defenses, the coaching change, of course, he's already on, his second staff essentially. So a lot of upheaval there. I think Tennessee will gradually improve in the second half and not be a joke offense. They were a joke offense for the first month of the season, but DK's a guy, and he's roster tagging Yahoo. He's like 20% or something like that. Yeah. I was looking at sleepers for week 9, and I'm like, why is DK still here? He should have aged out of this now. He should have graduated from this column, but I guess he hasn't. I'm also really curious, and I remember the days where rookie tight ends, you just laugh them off and ignore them. I talked about that was the receiver mindset for a while too. And then recent years, Bowers was great and Laporta was great. And obviously, there's one other, McBride was really good as a rookie.
Tyler Warren, obviously.
Warren, of course. I'm not thinking of Warren and the poor Bears fans, right? They're wondering if Caleb Williams was the right pick, and now they're wondering if Colston Loveland, who can still be a fine NFL player, if he was just a colossal miss because Warren looks so freaking good. Yeah. What did he catch? Like 278 passes at Penn State last year. Yeah. I love Ty Warren. I don't have a lot of Ty Warren, but again, the Colts have been so much fun. I'm really impressed that in a Browns offense that has very little to hang its hat on. Judkins has been good, of course. Yeah. Fannin has been, you notice him. This is one of my things. I call it the grandmother test, where we drafted a rookie tight end we're excited about. Grandma, can you pick him out? Can you pick out the first round player? Some players pass. If I told my grandmother, who's the best player in the Edmonton Oilers, just watch 5 minutes of this game. I don't care if you know nothing about hockey. You'll point to Connor McDavid and say it's him. Yeah. I think there's some of that with Fannin. The first week they're lining him up in the backfield, and the route diversity was there. If Njoku gets traded, and I realize usually the trade deadline is more talk than it is action, although it's been more interesting since they moved it back. But if Njoku gets removed from that offense, Fannin's ceiling becomes exciting. But even if it's not, the fact that he has survived despite a lot of stuff that would sink a lot of other players, I'm interested in him. And Mason Taylor, to me, Jets on bye. He may get cut in some leagues this week because people have more immediate needs. And I'm always looking. This is a time of year where people cut people they don't want to because they have to win this week. It's getting really important. Taylor, at worst, is the second target in this offense. And if Garrett Wilson isn't healthy, he's the first target. Now, I realize it's a Justin Fields offense. It's a Tyrod Taylor offense, perhaps. Maybe they'll even go down to their third stringer. So there's a low ceiling here. But I've liked what I've seen of Mason Taylor, and tight end isn't a very deep position. Be on the lookout for him possibly getting cut, because I think he'd be a great add for depth at fantasy's most beguiling position at times. Yeah, great calls. Love that. Another, rookie that at the running back position that we were all very excited about, and he was crushing, and he was really changing the culture of his offense and helping change the culture, was Cam Scadaboo. Oh yeah, and obviously, he has this horrific injury last week. He's now out for the year, and now we have Tyrone Tracy stepping in as their RB1. So I want to play a game. Been doing this on perspectives, for across different topics, different players. But we're going to say Tyrone Tracy or this guy, and I'm going to go through a bunch of this guys. Okay, first one, Tyrone, and this is for rest of season. Tyrone Tracy or Ramondre Stevenson. Yeah, I remember when the comedian Tracy Ullman used to have an HBO show called Tracy Takes On. So I guess this is like Tracy Takes On fantasy football style. It's got to be Tracy over Stevenson because it's just more competition. It's easier for me to tell myself a story that Tracy's workload is safe. I don't know that Singletary is going to be much of a factor. He'll catch the occasional pass, but I think Tracy has enough market share. And you talked about the importance of guys who have receiving chops. I mean, Tracy obviously was a receiver for much of his college career, maybe his entire college career. So he's got that part of the game in his bag. And Dart's been better than expected. I saw the list you mentioned to me. Some of them were tougher calls. We'll get to those guys. Tracy Stevenson was a clear win for. I'm sorry, a clear Tracy win for me.
Yeah. What about Tracy versus Kenneth Walker?
This is hard because betting on talent, I want to say Walker.
Exactly.
Betting on the roles, especially with Charbonnet gobbling up those short yardage touchdowns, Seattle, I think maybe the most underrated good team in the NFL. They don't get a lot of help. They're not even seen as like a favorite in the NFC West, and they could win that division. Maybe people don't want to trust Sam Darnold, but man, he's been good for a year and a half now.
Yeah.
I mean, let's accept it as a real thing. Bet on talent would say Walker, but Tracy's role is so much cleaner. I got to go Tracy. I'm curious how you see that one.
I got Tracy as well. Yeah. All right, let's go with Ja'Cory Krosky Merritt or Tyrone Tracy.
Yeah, just not enough passes for Merritt. And we saw last week what can happen when they fall behind. He just gets mothballed, right? He hardly played in the Green Bay game. It's been a lot of the standalone games, by the way. He hardly got in the field against Green Bay, hardly got in the field against Kansas City. Is Jaden Daniels 100% this year? Maybe not. Terry McLaurin's already been ruled out for week 9. That's a warning sign. So I really like Merritt as the player, and I feel like they've left a lot on the bone here. He's impressed me with his decision-making, with his quickness, and just to see somebody hit this late in the draft or as a free agent. I forget if he was 7th rounder undrafted.
Yeah, 7th rounder.
Yeah, 7th round. That's right. So, you see it once in a while. Pacheco was a 7th round pick. I love Merritt as the player, but the way – and Washington's kind of paying – I realize Merritt's a rookie, but – they're paying the price for having the oldest team in like 15 years, right? The team is crumbling, and I hate to see it. I hate to see Daniels get hurt as well. That to me was a clear Tracy win. Yeah,
same here. I mean, the lack of receiving for Krosky Merritt's definitely been a problem. And I actually talked about this on the 10 Trends episode. I tweeted about this too. He's just not like, when you're so reliant on rushing work, which is what he is, because he's not seeing that much through the air, you've got to be really explosive. And he was very explosive to start the year. But over the last handful of weeks, he's had a 2.6% rate of gaining 10 or more yards, which is horrific, right? It's really, really bad. He's going to regress a little bit. It's not going to be that low for the rest of the season, but that's the narrative shift, right? You go from, oh, we're so excited about this guy. His numbers look really good. And they did look good, but that's because he was breaking off some really big runs. And then he doesn't break off those runs. Oh, he's terrible. Why are we relying on him? Jeremy McNichols is better, all this kind of stuff. It's somewhere in the middle. It's always somewhere in the middle. And that's where it is, I think, right now.
I think he's actually going to be a good value next year in draft season.
Could very easily be. Yeah. I mean, they have a decent schedule rest of season. I still think that he certainly can be usable. It's just that I'm never going to heavily buy into a player who is not going to see much receiving work. And I think McNichols playing as well as he is in that role is what scares me. Like early in the season when no one really when Krosky Merritt was in a 3-way backfield and Chris Rodriguez was getting a lot of work and stuff. I actually had Krosky Merritt as a very cheap buy, just throw him on your bench and see if something develops here. I think that something has gradually developed. It's just that I don't think we're going to see the potential full fruition and what we could get from him, throughout his career this year, just because the receiving work just isn't there for Krosky Merritt.
Totally agree.
All right. We'll go to Tyrone Tracy versus David Montgomery.
Again, and I'm not going to say Tracy against the world, but again, I'm going to take Tracy over Montgomery only because Montgomery can never hit any kind of ceiling if Gibbs is playing this well. And they've shifted. Before it was oh, okay, it's 60-40, it's close to 50-50. Detroit has leaned into the idea that Gibbs is the alpha and Montgomery's a really nice secondary piece, but he's just that. It's an A and a B. It used to be a 1A and a 1B. Now it's a clear line of delineation. Gibbs has ascended. Montgomery is the counterpunch. So Tracy just has more opportunity upside every week.
Yeah. Oh, and injury is really the only way I think that would switch for me. This is where I think it starts to get a little bit interesting is J.K. Dobbins versus Tyrone Tracy.
This was the hardest one of the names that you listed to me. I went back and forth on it to the point that if somebody said they really felt one way or the other, I'm not sure I'd want to talk anybody out of it. Mm-hmm. I'm gonna lean to Dobbins because he's played so well. And I realize he's not catching passes, but they do like him in pass pro, so he stays on the field. Harvey's a really weird player right now because he's 4 touchdowns in his last 13 touches, but his role hasn't expanded that much. At all. Yeah. Also, do we count the touchdowns against the Cowboys count on the NFL stats? Right. I'm not really sure if they do or if they should. So that's a difficult situation. It may be that Tracy's got a better floor because not much competition. I lean Tracy on that one, but I would have no problem with Dobbins too.
Yeah, I think I'm Tracy. I had Dobbins as a sell this week just because the schedule is really tough. Mm-hmm. And it's, with him not being as much of a pass catcher and with there being the chance that they use RJ Harvey more down the stretch, it could be a chance for you to get out with Dobbins. But yeah, I mean, it's certainly not easy. Rico Dowdle is the next one.
Yeah, I'm smiling. It's a little bit of a rueful smile because I don't think I have Rico Dowdle anywhere. And I was convinced when Hubbard came back that Dowdle would still be the guy, and they have been stubborn about that for 2 weeks. They've split the work, but I give Dave Canales credit. Another coach who's not afraid to be kind of forthright in the media. I've covered football on all levels, high school, college, pro, and they generally don't even want to admit there's a game on Sunday, let alone what they're going to do with their team. But Canales pretty much said, okay, it's going to be the Rico Dowdle show. It's not I'm not paraphrasing here, but he basically conceded that Dowdle has one, Hubbard's the two, and Rico Dowdle to the moon, man. I realize his big games came against ideal opponents. We talked about Dallas just giving it away, but Rico Dowdle's their best running back. And this is from somebody who had a lot of Hubbard shares last year and has more Hubbard shares than I would like to have this year. Yeah. Not a ton, but enough that I'm worried if they're even going to be useless in a week or two. I think Rico Dowdle shoves Hubbard out of the way. They have to play their best players. They have to respect the integrity of the competition in the locker room, and that's going to happen this week. So Rico Dowdle is going places.
How about Travis Etienne?
Yeah, there I'm going to go with Tracy because we talked about this new staff. They inherited Etienne. They targeted Tootin. This is right, and we're going to see it again. This is a reveal week. All these teams coming back. If Tootin's going to have a role on this team, I think some of it will show this week, and I'm thinking it probably will. Not that people are banging down your door to get Travis Etienne, but this is a case where how do you make trades, right? Especially if you wanted to trade Etienne, who I think is a great person to trade right now. You say to somebody, hey, I got good running back depth. Looks like you could use a running back. Mm-hmm. Let them come to Etienne. You don't scream out, I'm trying to trade Travis Etienne. It just seems fishy. People are on guard. Mm-hmm. Ask them, hey, rank my running backs. How do you rank them? How do you sort them out? See, let them tip their hand if you can. Just have a conversation. Yeah. Sometimes you talk about boiler room. Just get them to say yes at something. If you were drowning and they threw you a life preserver, would you take it? Yes. It's kind of a silly example, but Ben Affleck sells it. Just have conversations with people and don't necessarily lead with where you want to end up and see if you organically get there. Yeah, I think it's a great time to get out of the Etienne business. I think Tootin has a good chance to ascend. And even if that doesn't happen, Etienne's upside is pretty tempered. So that's a Tracy win for me.
All right, last one. And I want to ask you where you're at with this guy too. Mm-hmm. But Chase Brown versus Tyrone Tracy. Yeah,
that's a Chase Brown for me. And it's just nice again, Flacco, older guy. I guess he's 40. It looks like he's 52 at times, but he's playing better than Browning. We'll see who plays this week. Hopefully the shoulder injury for Flacco isn't that bad. He obviously loves nothing more than the pump targets to Jamar Chase, who's got 18 targets a game, but no catches over 20 yards. So it's crazy.
I talked about this in my mailbag, that when we're recording this, the mailbag's not out, but it's just wild that Jamar Chase over the last 2 weeks has like a 54% target share. We're talking like there's only been 5 wide receivers since 2011 who have had multiple 50% target share games in a season. And Jamar Chase has done it in back-to-back weeks. Like it's just the amount of volume he's seeing, no one could have predicted this, to this.
I know on pace can be kind of a silly game, but if you take the 3 Flacco games and Chase's production and on pace it for a full season, you had over 300 targets.
Yeah, it's just ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And clearly it's not going to maintain to this degree, but
for sure. But here's the thing though. Flacco is competent.
Right, exactly.
The offense is competent again. And I realized P. Ryan, he had the 9 carries last week. He had a touchdown. He had 10 touches overall. They've always, teams like him as a pass blocker. He's got the chops to play in the receiving game. So Brown, we always kind of knew last year's snap share and participation rate was, at the high end, just like those Matt Forte type stats, like never coming off the field. That was a little bit unrealistic to keep that. But all Brown really needed is the offense to show the ability to be competent. And I realized part of that was the coaching. Burrow's injury, of course, is a killer. The offensive line has been very bad. But now that Flacco can make this offense at least competitive, to me, Chase Brown is an easy punch. I would take him over Tracy, and I actually think he'll just be a kind of a set and forget running back 2 the rest of the season.
Yeah, that'd be great. I think that Chase Brown, yes, he was a volume play in a offense play, a situation play, like where we were drafting him and stuff. But at the same, I think he's good. Like
Me too.
I don't think that he's like a bad running back that, now that not many running backs could do anything in the situations that he was in the line and the way that it was performing earlier this season that he was running behind. And I think we've seen, if you watch the last 2 games, granted, easier opponents and, obviously we're going to see him shine a little bit more, but he's created a lot on his own too. And you just give him a little bit of space and he can do that. So, I think that if there is any downside here, it's that, again, you mentioned the Samaje Perine, the receiving stuff hasn't been as strong under Flacco. Hopefully that regresses a little bit because his route participation rate hasn't changed that dramatically. This is sort of where, because I'm relatively high on Tracy. I think that this is sort of where, the Rico stuff after all the coach speak and whatnot, I feel better about. So I'm pretty much on par with you with everyone that you had mentioned there.
Do you have Tracy shares? It's because once Scadaboo came in, I just thought Tracy was almost valueless.
Yeah. I mean, like I was mostly splitting the two in drafts, best ball wise. I probably had a little bit more Tracy because I got nervous down the stretch when I'm drafting a little bit more volume about the Scadaboo injury that he was dealing with, throughout August and whatnot. I liked Scadaboo as a prospect just fine. Like I said in the late round prospect guide, he had the second best production profile in the class behind Ashton Genty. I mean, it was literally those 2 guys, and he comped to Kareem Hunt too, which was obviously pretty interesting and attractive. But I've been a Tyrone Tracy guy too. Like I think they had a situation where both running backs were just good. And I think Tyrone Tracy is still a good player. And so I'm excited to see what he can do, in this role, with a more competent quarterback situation, given what they're doing offensively this year than they had last year when Tracy was getting a lot of work. It's crazy because I talked to, late round subscribers and they're saying, some of them are in like pretty casual leagues and they say that like some of their leagues didn't even bid on Tyrone Tracy. Like, so there are people who just don't think that this is going to be like a very fantasy viable thing. But I think Tracy's a really good player. To me, there's not a big gap in talent between Tracy and some of the running backs we just talked about. And so I'm fine with buying into that and leaning into him as an RB2.
Yeah, for sure. And if, I was telling people if they were in a position to bid on him this week, I would have been aggressive with it. Obviously by now that stuff has sorted itself out, but
right.
And who knew? I thought Jackson Dart was going to be, kind of fun, but ineffective. And I realize he makes mistakes every game and he still takes on too much contact, but at least he's made the Giants, even with Malik Neighbors being hurt. They missed Slayton for a while, who's at least a useful player. I had no idea I'd actually look forward to watching the Giants, but that's been the case since Dart took over.
Get almost anything you need delivered with Uber Eats. What do we mean by almost? Well, you can't get a well-groomed lawn delivered, but you can get a chicken parm delivered. A day at the lake, that's a no. A Philly cheesesteak, that's a yes. An afternoon stroll, sorry, no. A burrito bowl, happily, yes. What about a day of sunshine? Not happening. A box of fine wines, yes, that is happening. Delivery is on its way. Okay, how about some clear skies? No. Well then, how about some french fries? Yep. A little escape? No. A delicious bowl of grapes? Yes, that. How about a freshly cut lawn? Can't help you there, but barbecued prawns, order it and it's on its way. Get almost anything delivered with Uber Eats. Order now. Alcohol in select markets. Product availability may vary by region. See app for details. Get almost anything delivered with Uber Eats. Order now.
Hey, there's so many reasons to love Liberty Mutual Insurance. For instance, there's Limu, Emu, and Doug. You gotta love those guys. And then there's the jingle. It's so catchy.
Liberty, 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 liberty.
But the best thing about Liberty Mutual is that they bundle your car and home insurance to save you money. And who doesn't like to save money? Everybody does. I mean, everybody. But how they save you money is just so smart. They look at your specific situation and figure out what works for you. Liberty Mutual customizes your car and home insurance so you can save money. So think of it this way. When you got a dual threat QB, a smart offensive coordinator, they'll customize their play calling to fit your talents. Well, that's what Liberty Mutual does. It builds a playbook just for you. They're really going above and beyond to save you money. There's no reason to wait. Start your quote at libertymutual.com.
Once again, I got to give my guy Jim Sonis, who comes on the show every winter and spring to talk quarterbacks. He's a quarterback model, and that model pre-draft had Jackson Dart as a top 10 quarterback over the last decade, and he nailed it. He had Jaden Daniels last year, nailed that.
Wow.
So the model has been, and it was high in Drake May too.
Those are huge hits. All of those,
Dude,
man.
yeah, he's been crushing it. So I want to, because that was what really got me on Jackson Dart, was talking to Jim, talking through it, and all the data points that he was making. And I gotta give him some love, because he absolutely crushed it.
That's another thing, another tip, right? Is that if you have somebody who specializes in something, just tap their brain. You talked about Jim, how well he's evaluated the quarterbacks. I obviously work with Matt Harmon, who's known for his wide receiver work. So whenever I'm unsure about wide receiver stances, I just, I send Matt a text, or, I send him an email, and I say, look, you know this stuff, you studied this stuff, you charted this stuff. What do you got for me? And, if somebody is not just smart, but in this case, special, Matt Harmon is all about receivers. Your colleague Jim is all about the quarterback evaluations, and they both have the track record that back it up. So if somebody specializes in something, having trouble putting, go to the putting guru.
Of course.
I'm not afraid to crib off the people who know what they're doing.
Yeah, 100%. I've been texting Harmon every week, just commiserating about Caleb Williams and not being able to get Rome Odunze the ball, and being so inaccurate over the last day. Finally, last week we had a more competent performance from Caleb to Rome. But yeah, I mean, Harmon's my go-to with a lot of just making sure that I'm seeing this properly, right? Like I was doing research on Quentin Johnson this week, and I'm like, hey, this is what I found, and is this what you're seeing too? And I think it's a good thing to do.
What were the QJ takeaways?
QJ takeaway was that over the last couple of weeks, they've been running a lot more go routes with him, and basically using him like they did last year as sort of as what Harmon would call the sacrificial X, right?
Yeah, cardio,
Yeah. And so I don't know if that's going to continue, but I think that the bad part for QJ is that Aronde Gadsden has emerged, and that's the offense is cooking. And so why would they really change it up that dramatically? That's the issue. But then you could also tell the story of this is what's happened after he came back from injury, and maybe that injury is still lingering. And so there could be an opportunity, just shouting this out to everyone listening, there could be an opportunity to really, really buy low on QJ if this continues, because then we could latch on to the injury narrative and say, maybe they start to change it up a little bit and use him in different ways. But if we're looking at strictly from a descriptive perspective, which is what that really is, my QJ take isn't so much this is what's going to continue happening. It's this is why this is happening. They're just using him not like they were at the start of the year, which is a little unfortunate.
I know this will feel like cheating, but at the same time, I feel like QJ's stock is down, and yet there's a possibility the people who roster him right now may have just bottomed him out. They don't trust him anymore.
Right, exactly.
They see the bad drop.
Exactly.
They see Gadsden emerging, which is obviously a thing. So while I have to rationally lower my expectations for Johnston, it's also possible there could be an overcorrection by the people who roster him right now. So those two things can exist in the same world.
Exactly. In my opinion, if this continues, then he's basically Jameson Williams, where sure, we can use him during bye weeks and in a pinch, and, fingers crossed that they do change. Speaking of coming out of the bye and changing things up, there's already been some coach speak about them using JMO more. Let's hope that happens, because I think it just makes that offense a lot more dynamic. But regardless of that, this is, you're totally right. When a lot of times when this stuff happens over a 2 or 3 game span, you will see fantasy managers just not want to have anything to do with that player and just think, the absolute worst about that player. It could be a time, if you haven't gotten QJ, or if you want some more exposure, find someone on your bench that you can trade away that might even just be a 1 week start, like a Bam Knight or something like that, and get QJ and say, hey, maybe this turns around, and maybe this is just really an anomaly that's going on right now.
And never forget too that wide receiver is the variance position. There's just going to be boom and bust, and one play being called a catch or not a catch, or a foot out of bounds, or whatever it is, will radically change what their outlook is and how we feel about them, the taste in our mouths at the end of the week. So, and even the best players, Justin Jefferson, every once in a while will have a 3 for 24 game. It just happens. Even
it just happens.
Of this position. There's just more variance at that position, which is why you need to take these broader views sometimes to make a good decision that makes sense moving forward.
100%. All right. One more for you before I let you go. Been asking for some bold takes for the upcoming week. We've had some pretty big hits. The biggest one, I think, so far, James Coe said that Stephon Diggs was going to be the wide receiver 1 the week, overall wide receiver 1 the week that he played Buffalo. And he was, I think, the 2 that week. So I'll give him the W for that one.
That's a great one.
Yeah. Give me a bold take for week 9.
Yeah. James Coe, another smart guy, and he and Harmon do a lot of work together. Yeah. So certainly somebody on the fantasy approved list. I'm not sure this is going to be anywhere near as bold as that, but so Pete Carroll gets hired for the Raiders job. He's in his 70s, and Chip Kelly takes over the offense and beat the Patriots in week 1. Almost nothing has gone right since. Bowers obviously got hurt. Geno Smith has been a mess. We know that's, the red zone problems are kind of a Geno Smith thing anyway. And Ashton Genty, their high-priced rookie, really hasn't done much. I have to believe that Chip Kelly didn't forget. Not that I'm at all bullish on the Raiders' long view, but
Sure.
Genty was a really good pass catcher in college. I have to feel that they are going to eventually realize what they're missing here. And I think this is the week Genty finally catches like 7 passes.
Nice. I like it. Yeah, he's been one of the players that every time I post my rest of season rankings, there's someone that is like, why are you still relatively high? And it's not relatively high. It's just like, I'm at market with Genty, but no one has, they don't have that context with what the market is generally saying about him. Why are you so high on Genty? And it's just, he's a do-it-all back. He's, like we talked about Travion Henderson earlier and how it hasn't clicked for him yet. Don't forget, it didn't really click for Genty the first couple weeks of the season. It didn't click for Amari and Hampton the first couple weeks of the season. Sometimes it just happens. Like sometimes they just realize this is what I got to do. And I do think that it did click for Genty, and hopefully you're right. Hopefully that Raiders coaching staff decides to use him a little bit more in ways that they should be using him, because he is a very, very talented player. But Scott, man, this was
big reveal week, man. Again,
yeah,
6
teams
teams off bye. We look at those 6 teams very carefully. I'm going to give you one more tip, by the way, just for fun.
Yeah.
Because we're still in the teeth of bye week season, right?
Yeah.
Remember that anybody who's on bye Monday morning, go over to Yahoo, find somebody in your bench who lost value, and pick up somebody who's on bye who didn't play because they're a free agent in your league. People forget that. I call those gap pickups. People even get mad at me sharing this tip because it's such a it's
a great tip.
It's like the bar without a sign on it. It's like, you mentioned NHLPA 94. Yeah. It's not so much me. It's Ronick. He's good. Right.
Oh my God. So good.
Yes. So good. But yeah. So remember Monday morning, make those gap pickups. And again, in bye week season, people are cutting guys they don't want to. Mason Taylor may be one of those guys. He's on bye. Maybe you don't have room for Mason Taylor. And then Monday morning, one of your backups got hurt or something. He's not worth anything anymore. Like I had to cut Kendrick Miller, who I was really high on a few weeks ago because he got hurt. He's out for the season, but then I made a gap pickup on Monday morning. So if you're playing at Yahoo, and I hope you are, just keep that in mind for your Monday plan.
Yeah, you can do that with streaming defenses at the very least.
Great, love it.
Yeah, that's the easiest way to do that. But man, this was awesome. I love chatting with you. Love talking ball with you. Let everyone know what you're working on, where they can find you, all that good stuff.
Sure. Yeah. Scott Pianowski, easy to find on Twitter and Blue Sky. I am part of the fantasy newsletter over at Yahoo, Get to the Points, which, you should be reading right after you read JJ's stuff in the morning. We come to you, I think, 3 days a week, periodically on the podcast as well. And then, all sorts of NFL content. And I will cover fantasy baseball when that comes around too. But if you follow me on social media, Twitter, Scott_Pianowski, or Blue Sky, just search Scott Pianowski, pretty unique name. You'll find me, and I'll link to all my stuff. And also love to talk about anything non-sports. You've seen a great movie, your new album you like, you get dog pictures, whatever it is. We're all human beings too. You have food photo to show, pasta recipe. I'm open to anything. Let's have some fun. This is all supposed to be fun. It's a game about a game. And, I'd love to have you along for the ride. I see you golfing. I saw that you had that hole in one, right? Like a month ago or so, or I did my second one. Yeah.
That's
very
amazing,
lucky. Man. I wish everybody could have that once. I'm about a 15 handicap, which means I'm an okay golfer. I can shoot in the 80s. I can shoot in the 90s. I'm never going to be great, but the gods have smiled on me twice, and it's
amazing.
I wish everybody who plays golf gets to experience that at least once.
Did you have any urge to just quit playing after that hole in one, like just to end it on a high and just be done?
I'm kind of obsessive about golf.
Yes,
in fact, the joke I always tell people is I say, if you knew how much I practiced, you'd wonder why I'm not better.
Yeah, right.
But
right.
I love it. Yeah, all the people at the driving range know me, and the people at the putting green know me and stuff. What really happened, JJ, is when the pandemic hit.
Yeah.
And I always liked golf. I really loved golf, but I didn't like practicing. I used to actually dread it.
Yeah.
And when the pandemic hit, one of the few things we could do was get outside and do things like play golf. So I went to the driving range a lot, and you could play, and they'd have the hole set up so nobody was going to touch the pin. We were going to spread germs and all this stuff. And so golf kind of kept me sane as much as it could during the pandemic, right? I mean, that March of 2020 was the longest month of our lives, right? Yeah. Things were crazy. And is the NFL even going to play, right? They had a truncated baseball season. I don't know how they played an NFL season, but whatever they did, and golf kind of kept me going, and I practiced a lot and got better. Again, I'm mediocre by anybody's account, but I'm always working on something. I'm always watching golf videos, or whether it's practice tips, the 1995 Masters, I just love that stuff. So the other thing too is that JJ, growing up, I played everything. I played hockey, I played basketball, I played softball, and even my adult. I really can't do anything now but play golf. I couldn't skate now, I couldn't run in a basketball game, So golf is the one sport I can play for the rest of my life. It's a great social game too. Yeah. So much love to the game. Yeah, no, it's a great game. Ever since kids have come for me, it's been a lot more difficult to play. But I've told my wife, I'm making it my New Year's resolution next year to play more golf. That is my official resolution for 2026. Let me ask you a fun question on the way out. Yeah. As a Yinzer, as a Pittsburgh guy, who's your all-time favorite Pittsburgh athlete? Oh man. I think that I have to say Lemieux because of what he's meant to the city. I'm too young for Roberto Clemente. And to be able, to say him, although I know that the meaning is Stargell and stuff like that. Right, right. I'll say that my favorite Steeler of all time is Hines Ward because he embodied sort of that era really well. And he was just a really fun player to watch. But I think it's got to be Lemieux just based on, he saved the franchise. He literally saved the franchise from moving and since then they've won 3 cups. So it's just, that man himself has brought me a lot of joy. Yeah. Do yourself a favor, go on to YouTube, not you, but the people listening and look at some Mario Lemieux highlights. And Damashek and I always talk about this, the 1989 MVP where Lemieux had 85 goals. Gretzky had 54 goals. They both had 114 assists. And Lemieux did not win the MVP because Gretzky had gone to LA and Lemieux, who would eventually have unbelievable teammates. Eventually, they had Ron Francis and all the other studs and everything. Yeah. That year, he was playing with Bob Airey and Rob Brown. He made Rob Brown into a 50-goal scorer just because Lemieux was a god. And Bob Airey was like a third-line player who was on this line with Lemieux because they had nothing else at the time. Yeah. He was basically playing with 2 journeymen, and he had 199 points and 31 more goals. I don't know. I'll never – and the – supporting cast in LA was actually pretty good. Bernie Nichols, who was a very good NHL player, I think scored 70 goals that year. No disrespect to Gretzky or anything, but that was one of the all-time wrong picks. I got to say one more thing. I know we've gone way over, but as far as MVPs go, I'm talking NFL MVP, all right? It's become the best quarterback award. The only non-quarterback who's won recently has been Adrian Peterson. That was like 13 years ago. Yeah. Taylor's having this great year. He'll never win MVP. Right. I just wish he was most outstanding player. The player who defines the season. Because to me, like Cooper Kupp was that guy in 2021. JJ Watt was that guy the year that Rodgers beat him out. Jerry Rice could have won in 87. Randy Moss didn't even get an MVP vote the year he had 23 touchdowns. I realize you can't separate him and Brady because Brady had 50 touchdowns. Whatever. Brady was a great pick. Nothing wrong with that. But man, Kupp, it's funny how receivers can win or running backs can win an MVP in like a game and a Super Bowl, but why can't they be the MVP of a season? If it was most outstanding player, if it didn't turn into everybody's personal definition of what valuable means, then I think we just have a more interesting voting for that award. I thought Kupp was the guy in 21, and I think Taylor could easily be that guy this year, and he'll never win it. Yeah, exactly. I do think that it's just one of those things. Like I've distanced myself since I've been at, since I was at Number Fire where we had to write more of that kind of content and stuff like that. I've distanced myself from like having strong opinions on coaching hires and, MVP stuff, all that kind of, and like real football stuff. I'll randomly throw out some takes, but it's, nothing that I'm the expert on. But I do think sometimes with like the MVP, I'm like, can we just dumb this down and just be like, who do you think is the best? Like just very simply without, going into that nuance, because yes, when you go into that detail, it would be a quarterback, as we know. You don't have that player, like the Jonathan Taylor thing. It's pretty interesting because the biggest change year over year is Daniel Jones, right? Like nothing, like what has dramatically changed for Jonathan Taylor, and it's that would be the biggest change is the change in quarterback, and yet we're seeing such dramatically different results from Taylor. So then you could deduce and say, okay, well then he's not the MVP because there's this other piece that would hypothetically be that MVP, but then that other piece is not nearly the best player at his position, so you can't call him the MVP, right? And so like, yes, you can get into that detail, but I do think that you're right. It's like who defined that season, and right now it's got to be
what Taylor is doing, unless we see, the continuation of Drake May playing as well as he has. To me, like, I think Drake May has been the MVP so far. Like
that.
If you were to
average cast around him. Diggs is not the same player unless James Coe is on your show promoting him. Booty's a nice player. And was it interesting that he had better stats than Thomas and Neighbors that one season at LSU, who was actually their alpha receiver.
He was a good prospect.
But Drake May is so freaking good. Okay, I swear, last question.
Yeah.
Is the pumpkin risk for Daniel Jones, when I say pumpkin risk, just the risk that, oh my God, he just forgets everything. He goes back to being mediocre. Are we getting close to zero pumpkin risk on Jones? Or do you still have a little bit of that? It's almost Halloween. The monster's under the bed. The monster's hiding in the closet. Daniel Jones is going to get me. Where are you at on that?
I think that it is still there because I do think that we can see certain quarterbacks in certain situations even get hot for 12 games and it still exist because it's such a cerebral position and such a mentally based and mentally driven position. But yeah, I mean, like he's to me, he's going to get a contract with them, like a long-term contract, and he'll probably be their quarterback for the immediate future. So
it's probably comps pretty similar to Darnold last year. Yeah. Great season. Oh my God, what is Minnesota going to do? And then he plays terrible against Detroit. He plays terrible against the playoffs. And it's like, okay, well, they're going to wave goodbye. And
I think that's a very real possibility for Daniel Jones. I said it on Living the Stream this week on more of a relaxed, I mean, this is a pretty relaxed show too, but more of a, relaxed style show. I wouldn't be surprised. And this is just completely vibes based. But if this is the week that like the Steelers beat the Colts, right? Like just the most NFL thing of all time, the most Mike Tomlin thing of all time. And then all of a sudden we're having these conversations in the opposite direction for Daniel Jones. I don't think that's the median outcome, but I think that like, that's the way that the narratives are driven in this league and in this game and this is what we talked about throughout this entire show is like one game from a player that's not up to some standard that they've set. We almost take it too far then in the other direction. So, depending on how you would define like turning back into that, he's going to have a game or two where he's not flawless or where not even flawless, but like, he's played well basically every single game. And so he's going to have a game or two in there where people then start to question, and he's not going to have the same kind of leash that, a younger up and coming quarterback like a Drake May or like an established one like Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen. When they have a bad game, okay, it's just a bad game. They're going to bounce back. But we just don't, we will never have that with a player like Daniel Jones, unfortunately, when we probably should. I think the Colts front office though will. Like they'll sit there and be like, okay, we know that we have something okay that can function in this offense.
That speaks to the fact that nobody hits the high end of their range every week, and that's why we always talk about outlier performances, good or bad. You're never probably as great as you look on your best day, and you're probably not as horrible as you look on your worst day.
Right.
And how do the Falcons beat the Bills and then get trounced by Miami?
Right.
That's football.
Right. It just happens.
Range of outcomes in football.
Yeah. It's like, just be okay. Like that's the thing. You don't have to have answers for all of this stuff. You just have to be okay that this stuff happens. That just like when you go out for a run, you're going to be slower one day than another day. And you don't know exactly why, but there's reasons why. These are all humans as well. Right.
For sure.
And there's going to be days where they just don't have it together, where the coaching staff is calling horrible plays, where a fumble doesn't go their way, where it does go their way. That kind of stuff is just going to happen. And if you don't let yourself react too harshly to those things, you can be a better fantasy player and just football watcher in general, over the long term.
So well said. You have to make peace with variance.
Yeah, you really do. You really do. Well, I appreciate the time, man. As always, everyone can follow me on Twitter, on Blue Sky at LateRoundQB. Check out my work, lateround.com. Make sure you're subscribed to this show, both via podcast, but also on YouTube, youtube.com/@LateRoundFF. Happy Halloween, everyone. Thanks to Scott once again. Really appreciate it. And thanks to all of you for tuning in.
Whether you're kicking off a campaign, gearing up for an event, or suiting up your team, 4imprint has the promo products to move your brand down the field. With thousands of customizable options like premium apparel, drinkware, tech totes, and giveaways, it's easy to score fan favorites that deliver impact. You'll get expert support, speedy delivery, and their 360-degree guarantee, so you can be 4imprint certain your order arrives exactly right on time. Explore more at 4imprint.com.
4imprint, for certain.
Get almost anything you need delivered with Uber Eats. What do we mean by almost? Well, you can't get a well-groomed lawn delivered, but you can get a chicken parm delivered. A little escape? No. A delicious bowl of grapes? Yes. Yes, that. An afternoon stroll? Sorry, no. A burrito bowl? Happily, yes. A day of sunshine? No. A box of fine wines? Yes. Uber Eats can definitely get you that. Get almost anything delivered with Uber Eats. Order now. Alcohol in select markets. Product availability may vary by region. See app for details. Get almost anything delivered with Uber Eats. Order now.